So what I looked at in my presentation is what Brexit could mean for both of those things. So in terms of the free movement of goods, what happens to these supply chains that crisscross across the continent, creating what is now a sort of European factory floor with no barriers to trade. What happens when we leave the single market and the customs union, as the government's current position is? What are the effects on the border? What are some of the options for minimising that? One of the areas to focus on is not just the sort of technical potential in the negotiations for limiting the impact on the border, but also what it could mean for traders who will need to prepare for a new relationship, for other private sector organisations who are critical in getting a good from country A to country B, and also what it means for the government, who have over 30 organisations involved in policy and operations at the border, and who will need to prepare for this new relationship, whether that's through new technology or new operational staff. What I then go on to look at is the free movement of people and what can happen. Firstly, looking at what happens to the EU migrants or EU citizens who are currently living in the UK and moved here over our 40 odd years of membership, and those that will continue to move here before we leave and during transition. So discussing what was agreed in December and what that meant for the sort of negotiating dynamic. So looking at the free movement of people, touch on what Brexit means for the EU citizens who move to the UK under free movement, will continue to move here before we leave in March 2019, and then possibly afterwards during the transition, what the agreement in December means for them, and also what it means for, or what it could mean depending on the outcome of the transition negotiations for those citizens that move here during the transition period. I think I'm going to look at what the big questions are for the future EU migration regime, or future migration regime in general, if indeed it is broadened out and there is a whole-scale revamp of migration, which looked like it was one possibility, although the Prime Minister's speech on Friday in Mansion House suggested that there would be some negotiation around future migration regime. So I want to look at what the big design principles are underneath that. So what does high skilled really mean? What does low skilled really mean? And how do you design a system that delivers the right outcome rather than is based around pre-existing criteria around salary? And then also looking at the questions of borders and enforcement, and why the UK government does not need another big implementation challenge, so should try and leave the borders alone when it comes to people, and also looking at enforcement and how any new migration regime will need to take into account all of those organisations that don't have big HR departments, that rely now on EU migration and will need to navigate new paperwork and new forms for the first time after Brexit.